Hey guys, today we'll be talking about counterplans. This is for LG specifically, so if you're doing PF or any other debate, do not watch this video. Be glad that your event does not have counterplans because it's kind of a headache.
One PF.
No, anyways. Continuing. Jargon list. So here's what we'll go over for like vocab. So CP means counterplan, per means permutation, DA or disad means disadvantage or like a neg contention, condo is conditionality, PIC is plan inclusive counterplan, and T is theory. That might like sound like a lot, but we'll go over each one in depth, so do not worry about it at all. Just know that like CP is counterplan because I'll see CP like a lot. Okay, so table of contents. First, we'll go over what is a counterplan. So parts of a CP, which is like text, solvency, net benefit, competition. Second is the types of CPs, PICs, advantage counterplans, process counterplans, consult, delay, agent, uniqueness, etc. There's also answering CPs, so the slot method and perm. We'll go over like perms in depth because those are like really, really important in like circuit debate. And finally, some extra stuff on the side, like kicking stuff, condo good and bad theory. Okay, so first of all, I'm not really the expert of like counterplans. So look at these sources in depth if you want like a more in-depth explanation of like different parts of theory or like counterplans. So for perms, watch this. For like parts of a CP, types of CP, and the SPLOT method, read these two articles. For condo, there's like really good theory video online, and then advocacy, look at this article. So moving on, what is a counterplan? First of all, a counterplan is a type of negation advocacy, and an advocacy is basically just a non-status quo neg position. So what this means is when neg only reads disads, they're defending the status quo slash no action. But the neg can advocate for their own change to the status quo, which is mutually exclusive to the affirmative plan, usually in the form of a counterplan or a critique. But in this lecture, we'll just go over counterplans solely because critiques you won't really hit that much at the upcoming tournaments we go to. So next, why run counterplans in the first place? First, curveball. The AF won't see it coming, so that's really good for you because you won't get out prepped on like a very unconventional counterplan, and it's much more likely that they'll stumble and not be able to like refute it properly. Second, if the topic is way too AF skewed, it's very strategic to read a neg counterplan that will like skew it back towards the negation. And third, honestly, sometimes you just read counterplans for the fun of it. So like sometimes like stock negations just get really boring over time. So counterplans kind of like spice it up. Also stock just means like typical like points slash like dissets that people usually read that you'll like meet every single round. And finally, if you want to respond to like a very specific AF point or impact, you can also run a CP. For example, if they have a really like curveball AF point about like climate change, even though the topic is about like the Commonwealth people of Australia and like I don't even know something about that, then you can run a counterplan being like, hey, let's just do like renewable energy instead to resolve that one like AF point slash impact, which we'll go over later. It's called an advantage counterplan, but just like keep that in the back of your mind if you're gonna try to like run a CP. Next, let's talk about the parts of a CP. So there's four. The first is the counterplan text. So this basically outlines what the CP does, and it can have multiple planks or different like actions you can take. For example, the counterplan text can be like, let's say the resolution is like, Nina ought to eat at KFC, Wendy's, and Cane's. The counterplan text would just be like, Nina ought to eat salad because like that's obviously very, very like much healthier. Um, and if I want to have like multiple planks to my counterplan, I'll be like Nina like should eat salads, burgers, and like fries. I don't know. Like you can see how there's like multiple different implementations you can take in a counterplan. That's included in the text. And then next is solvency. So solvency is basically just how the counterplan solves what the app also wants to solve. So for example, if your app is trying to solve like climate change, then the CP should also try to solve climate change too. Next is the net benefit. So this is basically just like the reason why the CP is better. And there's two ways to prove this to be true, either through a DA or disad or through an internal net benefit. So how you prove net benefit through a disad is just saying like the reason why the plan is bad that the CP avoids. So for example, if I'm on the topic of living wage and I say that living wage is bad because it causes inflation and unemployment, my CP would hopefully like avoid all those disads of unemployment and inflation, etc. And that's the reason why you prefer the CP over the AF. The other way is through the internal net benefit. This is an independent reason as for why the CP is good, and this is not a DA to the AF. So for example, I read the DAs about like inflation and like unemployment, etc. But maybe my CP has this extra part where it prevents like widespread pandemics. That'd be the internal net benefit because it's unrelated to the AF or the neg DAs, but it's an independent reason why the counterplan is preferable to the affirmative. Finally is competition. This is a bit more of a tricky concept to understand, but basically it's how the CP creates an opportunity cost to the plan. Because like think about it, whenever you create a CP, that's basically just an opportunity cost to the app. If you do the plan, like doing the plan creates a trade-off that forces us to forego another opportunity, which is the CP. So you want to consider like what's the alternative I could be doing instead of doing the plan as the negation. And basically, how you create competition is through mutual exclusivity and net benefits. Mutual exclusivity is basically saying that like the two things are not able to be done at the same time. For example, like we are competing based off of like funding. You can't fund I don't know, a plan to create more electrical vehicles and also a plan to implement a carbon tax at the same time. They're both too costly. So therefore you can only choose one. Or you compete through net benefits. You compete by saying that like, oh, we have so many things that we do better than the affirmative, like we avoid the disads and we have an internal net benefit that competes with the affirmative plan, and that's why we're preferable. And notice how like through these four things, your counter plan is truly complete. If you're missing one, like for example, if you're missing like a net benefit, there's no reason why you prefer the negation counter plan over the affirmative. If you're missing competition, there's no reason why we can't just do the affirmative negative at the same time. You must have all four to have a full counter plan that's like unstoppable. Okay, so next, how do you actually write a CP? So first, read the CP text, obviously. That's just saying that like, oh, the United States ought to, instead of implementing a wealth tax, the United States ought to do like, I don't know, we should do like a negative income tax instead. And then afterwards, you read a solvency advocate. This is how the CP resolves app harm slash advantages. So basically, this is what we talked about in the previous slide about solvency here. And then finally, you read a net benefit. So you read either a DA that's separate from the rest of the counter plan or links to the plan, but not like the CP. So basically, this means that like you have these disads or net contentions that you've already read in your case. That's your net benefit that you reference in your counter plan. You're saying that like, oh, we avoid all these disads. Or you can have internal net benefits, like this over here, which are independent reasons why you prefer the CP over the AF. So here's an example. The plan is Mark should go to the gym. The advantage is that Mark wants to improve physical fitness. The solvency is going to the gym boosts physical fitness. And as the negation, you can say a counter plan is Mark should instead eat healthier food. The solvency advocate, which is how the CP resolves the app harms or advantages, is that eating healthier foods also boosts physical fitness, which is what the solvency for the app originally was. And the net benefit of doing this over the app, you read it as a DA and not in the CP. You read the DA as like the fact that like Mark's muscles are not going to be sore because he's not really exercising and going to the gym, but he's still gaining this advantage of physical fitness. So you're avoiding the DA of muscle soreness, which reduces quality of life, and instead you're doing this thing of eating healthier food, which is also accessing the advantage of physical fitness. So the key takeaway from this slide is that the goal of the counterplan is to solve the impacts of the 1AC without triggering another impact that you mentioned. And here, let's explore like an example counterplan real quick. So this is an example counterplan, right? The topic is the United States ought to require that workers receive a living wage. The app was reducing living wage reduces poverty, and others econ benefits like productivity, consumer spending, and employment. Here's a net counterplan where they read a CP about only giving non-union workers a living wage. And by the way, this is like a pick. We'll go over what that is in the future and like the rest of the slides. And the words in red are my comments. So first they read some disads. This is part of the net benefit. So this is a disad about how living wage will create inflation, which the CP that they read later on will avoid. Notice how this acts as like a net benefit because the reason why the CP is preferable over the AF is because it doesn't trigger the inflation link. So they read all this stuff, blah, 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 and then they have the unemployment disad. The same logic applies here as inflation DA. This is just another net benefit to the CP. And so finally, here's the actual CP that they read. So first, CP text. The United States should require that non-unionized workers receive a living wage. Next is the solvency advocate, how the CP solves the app harms. Look at the fact that in the like tag over here, a union exemption allows union flexibility and empirically increases membership, but mandated wages kill effectiveness. This part over here especially refers to the AF living wage plan and how it's so bad and how the counterplan really like avoids this problem. So therefore, only giving non-union workers living wage would avoid this harm. And then finally, they have like these like internal net benefits about how like the counterplan is super good, which is not linked to the DAs above, but is a reason why you should prefer the CP over AF. The internal net benefit they go for over here is boosting healthcare access, and they link it into like how boosting healthcare access prevents bioterror and disease spread, which prevents extinction. So they basically impact out this internal net benefit and how it's super good and preferable because the counterplan has this like extra advantage that the affirmative does not access. And then finally, they should have included like 1 to 2 cards here explaining like why the CP avoids the inflation slash unemployment disads. But that was done later in the round that I had versus this person. So when you're writing your CPs, make sure to also link it back to why it avoids the disads of like inflation and unemployment. Okay, back to the slides. So, okay, counterplans. There are many types of counterplans. So there's like all these. Picks, advantage counterplans are the most common types. We'll go over these in depth. Process counterplans are a bit more like niche, so you can read through these links later if you want to like learn these more in depth. But we'll go over picks and advantage counterplans. So first, a pick. No, this is not a picture. This is a plan inclusive counterplan. Basically, it's like what the name says. You're including parts of the plan in your counterplan. So this advocates for the majority of the plan, except for a small modification, and argues the small modification makes the counterplan better. So for example, the plan is Nina should eat salads and school lunches. The counterplan is Nina should only just eat salads, and the net benefit is that school lunches are really nasty. And you see how this only does like a part of the plan and avoids like the disad of school lunches being kind of nasty? That's where it gets the net benefit from. And honestly, picks are pretty strategic because like the AF has a hard time refuting this because it's part of their own plan. So that's why picks are like really commonly read. Next is like honestly, I feel like the most common CP is the advantage CP. So it just solves an advantage of the affirmative. It's usually not mutually exclusive, but it competes off of the fact that disads are bad. So for example, the plan we had before about Mark going to the gym, that's the advantage is fitness. But the counterplan here, Mark should eat healthy foods. The advantage here is fitness, but it also avoids the dissad of muscle soreness. So you see how like an advantage CP basically goes for the same impacts like the affirmative has, such as like, for example, if your affirmative was like climate change and how we prevented, the CP also solves for climate change, but it might avoid like a dissad of like political instability or like political unpopularity of the plan. So that's where you get your competition from on advantage CPs. Finally is process CPs. So basically this is do the affirmatives plan through a different mechanism. There's 3 different types: consult CPs, delay CPs, and agent CPs. For a quick recap, like for a quick explanation of what this is, consult CPs is basically like we should consult someone before we do the plan. So for example, if your plan was like we should stop all countries from proliferating, consult CP might be like we should stop all countries from proliferating, but first let's consult like Japan. And the advantage is like if we consult Japan first, we can assure them that we're not doing anything bad. Delay CP is just saying that the CP should be done like maybe a few years down the line or like some time in the future and not immediately. For example, maybe for like the previous example about like proliferation, we should say, okay, we're gonna do the plan of like stopping all countries from proliferating, but in 10 years in the future, because right now there's like a huge looming threat in the world that we must have nuke weapons for to address. But in the future we won't need it anymore. Agent CP is just doing the plan through a different agent. So a very common type of this is the state CP. For example, instead of the federal government, like the US federal government, doing the plan, instead you want the states individually to do the plan. And the advantage is that states have better like control and like mandate, like they can mandate laws much more effectively and implement the plan much more effectively than the federal government. And that's why you prefer the CP of like states implementing the plan rather than federal government. And also we also have like the uniqueness CP, which I won't go in depth here because you really don't really hit this as like that much anyways. But if you want to read up on it, you can read this link and this link for like a more in-depth explanation. Okay, moving on. How to actually answer counter plans. There's the SWOT method and there's also perms, which we'll go over like really in depth because it's kind of confusing. So the SWOT method. There's it's an acronym for like solvency deficit, perm, links to net benefit, offense, and theory. And you should go through these 5 steps when considering how to answer your opponent's counterplan. Usually you'd only use like honestly these 4 up here, not theory, but in special circumstances you will have to use theory. We'll go over that in later in the slides. So for solvency deficit, it's basically like what it sounds like. Basically, the CP doesn't solve the AF offense. If you're saying, like, for example, your AF is let's decrease fossil fuels, your neg is we should do a carbon tax. Maybe your solvency deficit argument is that carbon tax does not effectively decrease global warming as much as fossil fuels, like banning fossil fuels does. So therefore, you still prefer the AF. There's a huge solvency deficit for carbon tax, so you don't do the CP. The next type is perm. So perm just means that the CP can be combined with the AF, and this gets rid of the competition that the CP has. For example, a common type of perm is perm do both. So for example, in this previous example, you have fossil fuels like bans and also carbon taxes. Maybe you can do both. Maybe we can like perm do both. Let's do both like the plan of like banning fossil fuels, but also taxing carbon at the same time. Because there's like also other ways carbon is emitted, not just fossil fuels, right? So this eliminates the negation like need to like negate basically because you can just do both under the affirmative world. Next is links to the net benefit. So basically, the CP triggers the dissets that they supposedly talk about like avoiding. For example, if they have a whole like if they have like a whole point on like a dissat about political unpopularity, how like banning fossil fuels is super politically unpopular, people hate it. You can also talk about how their CP of carbon tax is also very politically unpopular too, and so there really is no point of doing the CP because both the affirmative and negation link into this like net benefit, or honestly net harm in this case, of political unpopularity. They don't solve for their own thing that they say they solve. Finally is offense. This is just like pure reasons why the CP is bad. So this is like independent of solvency deficit, perms, and least net benefit. It's just saying like, for example, carbon tax is bad because it triggers XYZ impacts, like maybe carbon tax. Um, you can run on political unpopularity as like as a standalone thing if they don't mention it. So you can say like carbon tax triggers political instability because it's super unpopular among the political spheres. It's gonna create like more polarization, more like um kind of fights over whether or not climate change is like a good or bad issue, etc., which is bad for quality of life for citizens. And then finally is theory. So this is basically like theoretical arguments about like the status of the counter plan. We'll go over this in depth more, but if you want more info on like the SWOT method, you can click on this link over here, which links to like a really good website. Okay, so more about perms. A perm, no, it's not like for your hair. A perm is a permutation. It's a way in which a set or like a number of things can be ordered or arranged. And think of perm as like a test of competition. And as a reminder, competition, as we discussed on this slide over here, is how the CP creates an opportunity cost to the plan and how it's like mutually exclusive and how the net benefits are competitive. So, this basically a perm just argues that the AF and neg advocacies can coexist. And if the advocacies can coexist, then the truth of the neg advocacy does not disprove the AF. And therefore, like, there's no point in negating because you can just do both at the same time under the AF world. This is always an argument made by the affirmative. I've seen negation people try to perm the AF. That makes no sense. Just make sure to always do this on the AF. And also you do not get offense off of the neg advocacy when you do a perm. You don't just like absorb all their impacts. What you do though is you do get offense off the fact that both AF and neg is okay to be done at the same time. Think of the perm as like a thought experiment, but ultimately the ballot only enacts the AF advocacy. So like for example, the AF has like a plan, the neg has a CP. You say like, okay, perm, do both. This means like we have like a thought experiment that we could hypothetically do neg at the same time as the affirmative, but because the affirmative plan is still enacted in this world, you must vote for the affirmative ballot no matter what, even if they can coexist at the same time. So like notice how it like defaults to the AF ballot, even though neg advocacy technically is included in the AF world. So I was like watching this lecture video about like perms and I thought this was like a really funny slide. So when should the app actually make a perm? Every time the neg reads an advocacy. The reason why is because literally one sentence of just like perm do both can get rid of the entire counter plan. That's like crazy efficiency. So you want to be able to like read this perm because first of all, if they drop the perm, they drop their entire counter plan and you basically just like kicked out their entire counter plan with like 3 words, which is crazy efficient. But also second, if you can't really find like a very obvious perm, try to get creative with your perms if there isn't like very like obvious one you can go for. Because you always should like try to make this like an effort to try to make a perm argument. So here's how to actually make a perm. There's 3 steps. First, name it. Say the word perm followed by a modifier. So usually it's like perm do both. Perm do the AF do the neg. Perm do the AF and do the neg 10 years later. Or like perm do the AF as a means to achieve the neg, etc. You want to make sure the judge knows what you're actually doing. Second, you describe it. So you want to describe like what the world of the perm looks like. And this usually is to like resolve logical errors or like conflicts. So like, yes, fossil fuels and carbon tax can coexist at the same time. This isn't a logical conflict because like fossil fuels are like one thing, carbon tax is a whole nother thing. There's many things that emit carbon but are not from fossil fuels. So therefore both policies can coexist at the same time. And then finally is net benefit. Why the situation described by the perm is preferable to just doing the negation. And usually the net benefit is the solvency the AF already offered in the 1AC. So, for example, the reason why we shouldn't just do a carbon tax is because fossil fuels is like banning fossil fuels is so much better at reducing climate change than just doing a carbon tax because like overall it's much more like unavoidable. People can't like just commit like tax evasion for like carbon taxes unlike banning fossil fuels. So you just want to talk about the advantages you give in your 1AC and how that's still like kept as part of your net benefit as the affirmative and how negating gets rid of that. And so here is an example. So for example, in your 1AC AF, you say the US should increase competition with NATO. And and like the neg counterplan is that the US should increase cooperation with the EU. In the 1AR, you'd say perm do both. It is possible to cooperate with two organizations, the EU and NATO, at the same time. And notice how that is describing why this does not have any logical conflicts. And the net benefit is we can still use NATO's influence to deter Russia, whereas if we only cooperated with the EU, we'd be unable to deter Russia at all. So that's the net benefit to doing the plan and not just the counter plan, because like this is probably like a point brought up in the 1AC about how like NATO can keep Russia in check. So let's say you're on the negation, you're running a counter plan, and they say perm, do both, or something like that. How do you actually answer a perm? So there's three different ways. The first is proving the AF is undesirable. So the fact that like the AF has no net benefits and that your disads still hold true. So in the case of like, let's see, where's the example? Um, in the case of like fossil fuels and like carbon taxes, let's say like you want to say that the fossil fuels are really bad, like banning fossil fuels, because it's like way more politically unpopular than carbon tax, and the carbon tax does have political popularity. You would have a DA about like how fossil fuels triggers political unpopularity, which creates a lot of tension in our political atmosphere, sucks up political capital, is terrible for the US, etc. And then you want to prove that neg advocacy has to come first. So maybe the app is actually like an okay plan. Like you agree that it's like it can be possible, but in order to actually do the affirmative, you should do the negation first, and that would result in a negation ballot. And finally, you can prove that the perm is illogical. The aff and neg cannot coexist at the same time. That there's like maybe like insufficient funding or opposite actions, etc. I remember like a year ago for the LD topic, there was the right to housing. Some people would talk about like a UBI counterplan where they like have a universal basic income for all people instead of guaranteeing a right to housing and like funding housing. And then like you can't perm that because the negation can just argue that like UBI is super expensive, right to housing is also like really expensive, and we just don't have enough money to fund both, and therefore you must choose one. So those are the three ways you answer a perm as the negation. Finally, here's some like extra more like advanced methods. We'll go over theory, kicking, and condo. So first, theory and slash like what's even a condo in like the first place. Condo, no, it's not a house. You might hear phrases like kick the counter plan. You guys laughing at me right now, but it's true. I thought a condo was a house at first. No, it's not. So
One time, like I traded prep for like condo good, condo bad in like eighth grade. Like I just got scammed because like, bro, like you don't run that in PF. But
yeah, exactly.
it's
LD only. It's LD only. Okay, so you might hear phrases like kick the counterplan or like what's the status of the CP or like condo, dispositional, unconditional. Like what do those even mean? So in circuit debate, sometimes people will read like 3+ counterplans and you'll have to like respond to all of them and they'll like kick all three CPs and just go for a DA instead. Like, bro, that is so unfair. You just spent like your entire 1AR just talking about how their three CPs are so bad and they just kick out of it and you go for like something else instead, right? So kicking out of something basically just means like strategically dropping it. It's kind of like collapsing in a way, but like more severe because you just kind of like ignore the entire thing and you just like don't address it for the rest of the debate. And people kick out of stuff to like save time on like arguments they know that they're gonna lose in like the future anyways. So they're gonna focus on what they're winning. Okay, so this is kind of bad, and how you combat that is through theory. So first of all, let's define like what a condo or like conditionality even is. So conditionality in the real world means the quality of being dependent on a certain defined like conditions. But in debate, conditionality is the status of an argument in regards to whether or not it can be kicked or not. So any neg advocacy can be conditional. Um, for example, like a DA can be conditional. They can kick out of a DA if it's not good for them. They can kick out of like a K, they can kick out of CP, and they can kick out of like quite a lot of things. But like the AF doesn't have conditionality because if they kick out of the resolution as the AF, that kind of like defeats the whole purpose of affirming. So kicking is kind of like a purely neg thing to do um on the flow. So you might hear like people say, what's the status of the advocacy? You want to ask this question every single time during cross, every time the neg reads an advocacy to bind them to a status. So, first of all, what even is a status? There's like three possible statuses that you can choose. The first is conditional. Basically, conditional or like condo means that the neg can kick whatever they want. Dispositional means the neg can kick something under certain conditions, but like honestly, in practice, dispositional is just condo in disguise. They're like the same thing. And then finally is unconditional. Unconditional means the neg cannot kick under any circumstances. So they must defend their counterplans to the end of the debate, like fight to the bone. And so if you ask this question during cross, you can kind of bind the neg to defending their counterplans. So for example, if they say like, okay, we have three counterplans and you're the app and you're like, bro, like that is so many counterplans. What's the status of your counterplans? And they say they're all conditional. What you do is you call them out for abuse. So this is the T part of splot. If they read three CPs and all of them are condo, they can basically waste all your 1 AR time and then just like kick out of all the three CPs, which makes the 2 NR really, really easy to win because basically they just wasted all your time on nothing and they're going to spend all their time talking about stuff that went unaddressed during your 1 AR because you were too busy addressing all the CPs. This is called a condo debate. So you want to call them out on a theory level. If you don't know what theory is, go to Fiona's lecture about theory. But basically, it's an argument saying that like conditionality is just bad in general. Um, don't read this theory if they're just reading only 1 to 2 advocacies, like 1 to 2 counterplans, but do read a condo bad theory if they do 3+, because that's abusive. So this is honestly why T or theory is a part of Splot, because it's a valid way to respond to CPs, but only if they read so many that it's like to the point of abusiveness. If they just read 1 to 2 advocacies and say yes, condo, just refute the CPs like normal without theory, but don't spend too much time on it because they'll probably kick it. So here's the condo bad 1 AR theory shell. The interp is that the condo, like condo in general, is just bad. The violation, you quote them saying like, oh yes, all my CPs are conditional during like cross-examination and some standards you can go for as for why like the theory should be like held through include like reciprocity. So because the AF only gets one advocacy, neg should logically also only get one advocacy. Like that's just only fair. The second is time skew. It's like the unfair neg time advantage discussed on the previous slide of like them having the entire 2 NR like 6 minute speech talking about like random stuff while like kicking all their CPs and wasting all like 1 AR time. That's just like unfair. And then finally is depth of education because if you have like so many different CPs, you're not actually like delving into any policy action very, very in depth. So you want to talk about how depth is better than breadth of argument. So here's some final thoughts. Honestly, just like treat CPs like any other normal argument. Don't let them phase you. It's just like another like way the negation is trying to win. Always try to perm the CP no matter what. Like try to get creative with it, even if it doesn't seem obvious on like how to perm the CP. Always ask for the status of the CP during cross because if they have like a condo, like if they condo like all three of their CPs and they just kick it all, that's like kind of bad for you and you're probably gonna lose. And then finally, think about how the plan and CP interact with each other. So like what's the advantage of doing each both at the same time, one before the other, etc. These questions help inform decisions during round for what responses to go for, like if you're gonna do a solvency deficit, if you're gonna do like offense, etc. So overall, don't get too scared of CPs. There's normal arguments. You got this.